In March 1871, in the coal mining district of Wigan, Lancashire, the natural order of death itself was challenged by an event that defied every medical understanding of the era. What happened to the Morrison family would expose a truth so disturbing that local authorities sealed the records for 73 years. This is the story documented in the Wigan Infirmary medical archives, witnessed by 42 people, hidden until 1944. A story about 3 children who died in the wrong sequence, a mother who knew the impossible, and a physician who documented what science could not explain. Margaret Morrison was 31 years old in the winter of 1871, the wife of coal miner Thomas Morrison, and mother to 5 children in their cramped terraced house on Scholes Street. She had lost her own mother to childbed fever at age 14, raising her 3 younger siblings before marrying Thomas at 19. Her neighbors described her as practical, devout, and possessed of an uncanny ability to sense illness before symptoms appeared. She would wake in the night knowing which child had fever, which needed the chamber pot, which suffered nightmares. Her eldest, William, was 12 and already working the mines alongside his father. Mary, 10, helped Margaret with the washing. The 3 youngest were her treasures: Elizabeth, age 7, with her mother's dark hair and quick laugh; James, 5, who collected smooth stones from the canal; and baby Catherine, just 18 months, still nursing and clinging to Margaret's skirts. The family lived on Thomas's wages of 14 shillings weekly, supplemented by Mary's button sewing work. They were poor but managing, their small home filled with the ordinary sounds of childhood, until the morning Margaret woke screaming about coffins. March 3, 1871, began with frost thick on the windows. Margaret rose at 5 o'clock to kindle the fire, the same as every morning, while Thomas dressed for the mines in darkness. She nursed Catherine, set the porridge pot to boil, woke the older children for their day. Elizabeth complained her throat hurt but showed no fever. Margaret gave her honey water and sent her to help Mary fold the dried washing. At 7:30, Margaret stood at the window watching Thomas and William disappear into the pre-dawn darkness, heading toward the pit. She held Catherine on her hip, the baby's small hand tangled in her mother's hair. Elizabeth sat at the table drawing pictures in the coal dust Mary had swept into a pile. James played with his stones on the floor. Margaret turned from the window and said to Mary, "Fetch the vicar. Tell him to come today. We'll need him for 3 funerals." Mary Morrison would later testify that her mother spoke these words at precisely 7:43 a.m. because the church bells had just finished ringing the 3/4 hour. The girl stood frozen, the folded sheet falling from her hands. Margaret's face had gone white as the frost. Outside, her eyes fixed on something Mary could not see. "Mother?" Mary whispered. "What do you mean?" Margaret set Catherine down gently, her hands shaking. She walked to Elizabeth and knelt before her, touching the child's face with trembling fingers. "You first, my darling. 3 days from now. The fever will take you fast." She moved to James, who looked up from his stones with innocent confusion. "You'll follow her, my sweet boy, 5 days after your sister. The cough that brings blood." Finally, she gathered Catherine into her arms, pressing her face against the baby's soft hair. "And you, my littlest love, 7 days after James. You'll simply stop breathing in the night." Elizabeth began to cry. James asked if this was a game. Catherine, sensing her mother's distress, wailed. Mary ran for their neighbor, Mrs. Hewitt, who found Margaret sitting on the floor, surrounded by her 3 youngest children, rocking and weeping, repeating dates and times with terrible precision. March 6th, before noon; March 11th, evening; March 18th, just after midnight. Mrs. Hewitt sent her own son running for Dr. Edmund Cartwright, the physician who served the mining families. He arrived at 8:15 a.m. to find Margaret lucid but adamant, describing each child's death with clinical detail no mother should possess. Elizabeth's fever will reach 105 degrees. She'll call for water, but be unable to swallow. James will drown in his own blood. The consumption moves fast in children. Catherine will have no symptoms at all. She'll nurse at 10 o'clock that night, and when I check her at midnight, she'll be cold. Dr. Cartwright examined all 3 children. Elizabeth showed mild throat inflammation. James and Catherine appeared perfectly healthy. He prescribed rest for Elizabeth and assured Margaret she was suffering from nervous exhaustion, perhaps brought on by the harsh winter. Dr. Cartwright recorded in his journal that evening, "Mrs. Morrison exhibits symptoms of acute melancholia, possibly triggered by malnutrition or female hysteria. Her predictions are specific to the point of delusion. I have seen grief-stricken mothers imagine illness in healthy children, but never with such precise detail. I prescribed laudanum and bed rest, though she refused both. Against my medical judgment, I find myself disturbed by the certainty in her eyes." Cartwright, Personal Medical Journal, March 3, 1871. Thomas Morrison, summoned from the pit at noon, provided a different perspective. In his testimony to the inquest held weeks later, he stated, "My Margaret never took to fancies or vapors. She knew things, always had. She knew when the roof would fall in Section 7, told me to work Section 9 that day. 3 men died in 7. She knew when her sister would birth, down to the hour, though we lived 20 miles apart. When she told me about the children, I didn't want to believe her, but I knew she was right. God help me, I knew." Wigan Coroners. Inquest, April 1871. Reverend Samuel Blackwood, vicar of St. Catherine's Parish, arrived at the Morrison home that afternoon. His account, preserved in parish records, describes Margaret as composed but resolute, requesting baptismal certificates be prepared and burial plots consecrated. When I suggested prayer might change God's will, she replied, "I'm not asking you to prevent it, Vicar. I'm asking you to be ready for it." Her faith was not in question. She believed God had shown her this knowledge for a reason, though she could not fathom why. "I left deeply unsettled and did as she asked." St. Catherine's Parish Records, March 1871. On March 4th, Dr. Cartwright returned with Dr. James Thornley, a specialist in nervous disorders from Manchester Royal Infirmary. Together, they conducted a thorough examination of Margaret and all 3 children. Their joint report, filed with the Wigan Medical Society, documented findings that would later be classified. Margaret submitted to their questions calmly. She described each death in medical terminology no working-class woman should possess. For Elizabeth, scarlatina with complications. The rash will appear on her chest within 24 hours of fever onset. Her tongue will be bright red, swollen. The fever will cause convulsions approximately 6 hours before death. For James, galloping consumption. The initial cough will seem minor, but the hemorrhage will begin suddenly. He'll produce approximately 2 cups of blood before losing consciousness. For Catherine, sudden infant death, no preceding symptoms. Her heart will simply cease. Dr. Thornley tested Margaret's knowledge extensively. He asked about diseases she could not have encountered. She described the progression of diphtheria, cholera, and typhoid with textbook accuracy. When he inquired where she learned such things, she replied, "I don't know these words I'm speaking. They come from somewhere else. I see the deaths like memories of events that haven't happened yet." The critical, impossible detail emerged when Dr. Thornley asked Margaret to describe what would happen after each death. She stated, "When you examine Elizabeth's body, you'll find a small defect in her heart, a hole between the chambers. You won't see it without cutting her open, but it's there. It's why the fever killed her so quickly. James's right lung is already damaged from breathing coal dust in the house. You'll find black deposits throughout the tissue. Catherine's death will leave no trace at all. You'll write natural causes because you'll find nothing wrong." Dr. Thornley's private notes reveal his shock. If Mrs. Morrison is correct about these internal pathologies, she possesses knowledge impossible to obtain without autopsy. I have proposed we monitor the situation closely. Dr. Cartwright believes she may have read medical texts, but I observed her attempt to read the label on my medicine bag. She is barely literate. Where then does this knowledge originate? Thornley, Private Correspondence, March 4th, 1871. Word spread through the mining terraces like fire through coal dust. By March 5th, neighbors gathered outside the Morrison home in clusters, some praying, others whispering about witchcraft. The local newspaper, the Wigan Observer, sent a reporter who was turned away by Thomas. Miners at the pit questioned whether Margaret had cursed her own children. The Methodist minister suggested demonic possession. Dr. Cartwright posted a notice at his surgery warning against superstitious panic, insisting Margaret suffered from a mental affliction, nothing more. But he stationed himself at the Morrison home regardless, waiting. Elizabeth Morrison developed fever at 9:00 a.m. on March 6th, exactly as her mother predicted. The rash appeared on her chest by afternoon, the characteristic scarlet fever pattern. Dr. Cartwright administered cool compresses and willow bark tea, but the fever climbed rapidly. By evening, Elizabeth's temperature reached 104 degrees. Her tongue swelled and reddened. She called for water, but choked when she tried to swallow. Margaret sat beside her daughter's bed, holding her hand, whispering prayers and apologies. Thomas paced the small room, his face carved from grief. Mary tended James and Catherine downstairs, trying to keep them away from their dying sister. Mrs. Hewitt and 3 other neighbor women maintained vigil, witnesses to the unfolding tragedy. At 11:47 a.m. on March 6th, Elizabeth convulsed violently. Her small body arched, her eyes rolled back. Dr. Cartwright held her down while she seized, but there was nothing he could do. She died at 11:52 a.m., 5 minutes past Margaret's predicted time. The autopsy, performed by Dr. Thornley at Margaret's insistence, revealed the impossible. When he opened Elizabeth's chest cavity, he found exactly what Margaret had described: a ventricular septal defect, a small hole between the heart's lower chambers. This congenital abnormality would have been impossible to diagnose during life, Dr. Thornley wrote in his report. Mrs. Morrison could not have known of its existence through any conventional means. The child showed no symptoms of heart disease prior to the fever. I am at a loss to explain how the mother possessed this knowledge. Thornley, Autopsy Report, March 7, 1871. The Wigan Observer published a brief notice of Elizabeth's death, attributing it to scarlet fever. They made no mention of Margaret's prediction. But 47 people had heard Margaret's prophecy before Elizabeth fell ill. The evidence was documented. The timing was precise. And 2 more children remained. Margaret insisted Elizabeth be buried immediately in the plot Reverend Blackwood had prepared. "We'll need the space beside her soon," she told Thomas. "James first, then Catherine, in that order. They must be together." The funeral took place on March 8th. Margaret stood at the graveside, holding Catherine, watching James place wildflowers on his sister's coffin, knowing she would return to this spot twice more before the month ended. Dr. William Pritchard arrived from London on March 9th, summoned by telegram from Dr. Thornley. Pritchard was a Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians and author of several papers on prophetic dreams and premonitions. He had investigated 12 cases of alleged precognition, debunking 11 as coincidence or fraud. He came to Wigan expecting to add the Morrison case to his list of exposures. He spent March 9th and 10th interviewing Margaret, testing her knowledge, searching for evidence of deception. He examined the family's possessions: no medical books, no journals, nothing that could explain her detailed anatomical knowledge. He questioned neighbors about Margaret's character and history. Every account described her as honest, simple, and devoted to her children. Pritchard's investigation took a disturbing turn when he asked Margaret to describe other events she might foresee. She looked at him with exhausted eyes and said, "I see only my children's deaths, nothing else. But I know things about them I shouldn't know. James has been coughing for 3 days now, but the blood won't come until tomorrow evening. When it does, he'll be playing with his stones. He'll cough once, twice, then the blood will pour from his mouth like water from a pitcher. You'll be here when it happens, Dr. Pritchard. You'll try to save him, but you can't. No one can. Pritchard noted in his journal, Mrs. Morrison speaks of her son's impending death with a detachment that borders on dissociation, yet tears stream down her face as she describes it. This is not the behavior of a fraud or hysteric. She exhibits genuine foreknowledge while experiencing genuine grief. The contradiction is profound. I have proposed remaining in Wigan to observe the next predicted death, though every scientific principle I hold argues against the possibility of precognition. Yet the evidence of Elizabeth's death, the timing, the symptoms, the heart defect, cannot be dismissed. Pritchard, Case Notes, March 10, 1871. James Morrison's cough worsened throughout March 10th. By evening, blood-tinged sputum appeared. Margaret put him to bed early, knowing tomorrow would bring the hemorrhage. On the morning of March 11th, Margaret made a prediction that extended beyond her children's deaths. She told Dr. Pritchard, "After Catherine dies, you'll write a report about us. You'll submit it to the Royal College, but they'll refuse to publish it. The editor will write you a letter dated April 3rd, calling your findings incompatible with medical science. You'll keep that letter in your desk drawer for the rest of your life, and you'll never investigate another case like ours. This will haunt you until you die in 1894, still wondering if you should have tried harder to make them believe." Dr. Pritchard recorded this prediction verbatim, along with his skeptical response. He asked Margaret how she could know such specific details about his future. She replied, "I don't know how I know anything anymore. The knowledge just appears, like words written on the inside of my skull. I see James's death, I see Catherine's death, and I see you, old and gray, sitting in a study with my case file open on your desk, still searching for an explanation you'll never find." At 6:23 p.m. on March 11th, James Morrison sat on the floor, playing with his collection of smooth stones. He coughed once, twice. Then blood erupted from his mouth in a sudden, massive hemorrhage. Dr. Pritchard lunged forward, trying to position the boy to prevent choking, but the bleeding was catastrophic. James lost consciousness within seconds. He died at 6:31 p.m., with his mother holding him and his stones scattered in a pool of his blood. The autopsy revealed advanced tuberculosis throughout his right lung, with extensive coal dust deposits, exactly as Margaret had described. Dr. Thornley estimated the disease had been present for at least 6 months, though James had shown minimal symptoms until the final hemorrhage. On March 13th, Dr. Harold Whitmore arrived from the Home Office Medical Department in London. He brought with him 2 assistants and instructions to investigate the Morrison affair with full governmental authority. His presence transformed the tragedy into an official inquiry. Dr. Whitmore interviewed all witnesses, examined all medical records, and subjected Margaret to 3 days of intensive questioning. He proposed removing Catherine from the home for her protection, suggesting Margaret's predictions might be self-fulfilling through unconscious harm. Thomas Morrison refused, threatening violence if anyone attempted to take his remaining children. Dr. Whitmore's official report, filed March 16th and immediately classified, acknowledged the impossible. Mrs. Margaret Morrison has demonstrated knowledge of internal pathology that cannot be explained through conventional means. She accurately predicted the time, manner, and medical specifics of 2 deaths. Her third prediction remains unverified, but given the precision of the first 2, I cannot dismiss it. I recommend continued observation and documentation. However, I strongly advise against public disclosure of these findings, as they would cause widespread panic and challenge the foundations of medical science. Whitmore, Home Office Report, March 16, 1871, declassified 1944. The government stationed a constable outside the Morrison home with instructions to document everything that occurred. Dr. Whitmore remained in Wigan, waiting for March 18th. Margaret spent those days holding Catherine constantly, nursing her, singing to her, memorizing every detail of her baby's face. She knew exactly how many hours remained. March 18, 1871 was a Sunday. Margaret woke before dawn and dressed Catherine in her christening gown, the white linen she had sewn before the baby's birth. Thomas found his wife sitting in the rocking chair, Catherine asleep in her arms, tears streaming silently down Margaret's face. "I can't let her go," Margaret whispered. "How do I let her go when I know? How do I feed her and change her and sing to her when I know she'll be dead before morning?" Thomas knelt beside the chair, his calloused miner's hands gentle on his wife's arm. "You love her. That's all we can do. We love her until we can't anymore." The day passed in terrible normalcy. Catherine nursed, played, laughed. She showed no signs of illness. Dr. Pritchard examined her every 2 hours. Temperature normal, breathing normal, heart rate normal. Dr. Whitmore documented everything, searching for any indication of impending death. They found nothing wrong. At 10 p.m., Margaret nursed Catherine one final time. The baby fed well, her small hand patting her mother's breast, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. Margaret sang the lullaby her own mother had sung to her, the same lullaby she had sung to all her children. When Catherine's breathing deepened into sleep, Margaret held her for another hour, memorizing the weight of her, the smell of her, the perfection of her tiny fingers. At 11 p.m., Thomas took Catherine from Margaret's arms and laid her in the cradle beside their bed. Margaret lay down but did not sleep. She watched the cradle in the candlelight, counting each breath, each small movement. The doctors waited downstairs. The constable stood outside. The neighbors kept vigil in their own homes waiting for news. At 12:17 a.m. on March 19th, Margaret rose and went to the cradle. She touched Catherine's cheek. The baby was cold. Her chest was still. There had been no cry, no struggle, no sign of distress. Catherine Morrison had simply stopped breathing, exactly as her mother had known she would. The autopsy found nothing. Catherine's heart was perfect. Her lungs were clear. Every organ appeared healthy and normal. Dr. Thornley wrote, "This child died of no discernible cause. In my 15 years of medical practice, I have never encountered a death that left so little evidence of its occurrence." Mrs. Morrison predicted we would find nothing wrong, and she was correct. This is perhaps more disturbing than if we had discovered a pathology. Thornley Autopsy Report, March 19, 1871. Dr. Pritchard attempted to explain Margaret's foreknowledge through emerging theories of unconscious perception. Perhaps, he suggested, Margaret had observed subtle signs of illness in her children that her conscious mind did not register. Perhaps stress had triggered some form of hyper-awareness that manifested as prophetic knowledge. But even as he wrote these explanations in his report, he knew they were inadequate. Margaret had known about Elizabeth's heart defect, James's lung damage, Catherine's lack of pathology, knowledge impossible to obtain through observation alone. Margaret herself provided the most haunting explanation. In her testimony to the inquest, she stated, "I don't know why God showed me their deaths. I've asked him every day since. Maybe it was mercy, giving me time to prepare. Maybe it was cruelty, making me watch them die slowly. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe I needed to know they would die in the right order, youngest last, so I could bury them properly. So I could give each one my full grief before the next one left. I don't understand it. I only know I loved them, and I knew, and I couldn't save them." The doctors had documented the impossible. They had witnessed it. But they could not explain it. And their reports acknowledged this failure of science. In 1944, when the Home Office declassified Dr. Whitmore's report, historian Dr. Eleanor Ashworth discovered the Morrison case while researching Victorian medical records. She located the original autopsy reports, witness testimonies, and doctors' journals in the Wigan archives. Modern analysis of these documents confirmed their authenticity. The paper, ink, and handwriting all dated to 1871. Dr. Ashworth's investigation revealed additional evidence. She found Dr. Pritchard's personal papers at the Royal College of Physicians, including the letter from the journal editor dated April 3, 1871, refusing to publish his Morrison case study with the exact wording Margaret had predicted. Incompatible with medical science. Pritchard had kept this letter in his desk drawer until his death in 1894. exactly as Margaret had foreseen. Modern medical analysis of the autopsy reports provided new insights. Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric cardiologist who reviewed the case in 2003, noted that Elizabeth's ventricular septal defect would have been completely undetectable in 1871. Even if Mrs. Morrison had somehow obtained medical training, which she hadn't, there was no technology available that could have diagnosed this defect in a living child. The only way to discover it was through autopsy, yet she knew about it before her daughter died. This remains medically inexplicable. Chen, Journal of Medical History, 2003. The Morrison case stands as one of the few documented instances of specific, verifiable precognition in medical history, authenticated by multiple credentialed physicians and validated by historical records that survived 150 years of scrutiny. The Morrison case was not unique in Victorian medical records. In 1867, Sarah Jennings of Bristol predicted her own death and that of her twin sister to the hour, both dying of different causes on the same day. In 1883, Dr. Robert Fleming documented the case of Emma Whitfield, who described her husband's factory accident 3 days before it occurred, including details of his injuries that proved accurate. In 1891, the Edinburgh Medical Journal published the case of James McGregor, who knew the exact date his 3 children would die in a diphtheria outbreak, though none showed symptoms when he made his prediction. These cases suggest that human consciousness may possess capacities that Victorian science, and perhaps modern science, cannot fully explain. They challenge our understanding of time, knowledge, and the boundaries between mind and matter. Margaret Morrison buried her 3 youngest children in adjacent graves at St. Catherine's Cemetery, their names carved on a single stone: Elizabeth, James, Catherine. She never spoke publicly about her foreknowledge again. Thomas continued working in the mines until his death in 1889. William married and moved to Manchester. Mary remained with her mother until Margaret's death in 1903. In a letter to Reverend Blackwood written in 1895, Margaret reflected on the events of March 1871. "I have lived 24 years since I lost my babies. I have grandchildren now, and I watch them with joy instead of dread. I never saw another death before it happened. God showed me that one terrible truth and then was silent. I don't know why. I only know I survived it because I had to, because William and Mary needed me, because Thomas needed me, because life continues even after the impossible happens. I still dream of them sometimes, my 3 little ones. In my dreams, they're always playing together, and they're always in the right order. Elizabeth watching over James, James watching over Catherine, the way it should be." Morrison, Personal Correspondence, 1895. The Morrison family's tragedy raises questions that transcend Victorian medical mysteries. Can consciousness access information beyond the present moment? Can love create knowledge that defies physical laws? Can grief itself become a form of prophecy? Margaret Morrison knew the unknowable and bore witness to the unbearable. Her story, preserved in sealed archives for 73 years, reminds us that human experience sometimes exceeds scientific explanation, that there are truths documented but not understood, witnessed but not explained. If this story has challenged your understanding of what consciousness can know, subscribe to our channel for more documented cases from Victorian medical archives. Sometimes, history's deepest mysteries are the ones that were carefully recorded, officially verified, and deliberately hidden.